You don't need more motivation. You've probably already experienced that. Because if motivation were the answer, your life would already look different. Think about it. How many times have you felt inspired, genuinely energized, only to disappear a week later? For a few days, everything feels clear. You wake up earlier. You plan your routine. You feel focused. And then slowly, the effort disappears. No dramatic failure. Just distance. And what most people don't realize is this. There's a very specific moment when motivation stops working, and almost no one notices it. If you've been waiting for motivation to finally save you, subscribe. Let's talk about what actually holds when it disappears. This is follow through, where intention meets action. For a long time, I treated motivation like fuel. If I felt it, I moved. If I didn't, I stalled. And on the surface, that seemed logical. Why push yourself when the energy isn't there? Why force something when the mood is gone? But there was a question I never stopped to ask. Why was I building my commitments on something that disappears? Motivation is a state, and states fluctuate. That's not a flaw. That's biology. Your brain naturally shifts between energy and fatigue, focus and distraction. Those changes are normal. But somehow, I expected consistency from something that was never designed to be consistent. And every time the feeling dropped, I told myself the same thing. I'll restart when I feel ready. But what that really meant was something slightly different. I'll restart when it feels exciting again. I wasn't waiting for readiness. I was waiting for stimulation. And stimulation is exactly what motivation provides. At the beginning of things, stimulation is everywhere. The idea feels new. The identity feels new. Even the effort feels meaningful. But once the novelty disappears, something else appears in its place. Ordinary effort. And that's where the real challenge begins. Motivation feels powerful. It gives you clarity, energy, momentum. It makes action feel easy. But motivation is unreliable. It shows up strongest at the beginning. It fades in the middle. And it almost never appears when things become repetitive. And here's the uncomfortable part I had to face. If you only act when you feel motivated, you slowly train your brain to associate effort with emotion. You teach yourself a rule without realizing it. Effort only happens when it feels good. So when the feeling disappears, which it always does, the effort disappears with it. That's not laziness. It's conditioning. I conditioned myself to depend on intensity instead of presence. And when intensity dropped, I assumed something was wrong. Maybe the goal wasn't right. Maybe the system wasn't right. Maybe I just needed to reset. But if you step back and look at the pattern closely, it's almost predictable. Excitement, action, early progress, then resistance, then doubt, and then you leave, guilt, reset, excitement again. It feels productive because you're always beginning something. There's always movement at the start. But starting isn't the hard part. Staying when nothing feels dramatic, that's the hard part. That quiet stretch where there's no applause, no visible breakthrough, just repetition. That's where most people leave. Not because they can't continue, but because continuing no longer feels meaningful. And when effort stops feeling meaningful, the mind begins negotiating. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe later. Maybe I should rethink the plan. But those small negotiations slowly create distance. And distance quietly turns into abandonment. There's something else. I had to admit to myself. I had heard the advice before. You probably have too. Break it into smaller steps. Lower the bar. Just do a little. The advice sounded almost too obvious. And because it sounded obvious, I dismissed it. Not because it was wrong, but because my ego didn't like what it implied. Doing less felt like admitting I couldn't do more. Scaling down felt like mediocrity. It felt like lowering my standards. And if I'm honest, I would rather quit entirely than continue in a smaller, humbler way. That realization was uncomfortable because it revealed something I hadn't seen clearly before. It wasn't the size of the task that made me leave. It was the hit to my identity. I didn't want to be the person who could only manage 10 minutes. So I became the person who managed nothing. That's not a productivity issue. That's your ambition protecting its image. It's easier for the ego to quit completely than to continue imperfectly, because quitting preserves the fantasy. Continuing exposes reality. At some point, I stopped asking a question that had been misleading me for years. How do I stay motivated? And I replaced it with a different question. How do I stay present? That shift didn't magically fix everything overnight, but it removed the illusion that motivation was supposed to carry me, because motivation was never meant to carry anything long-term. Motivation starts things. Presence sustains them. That's when I started thinking about a simple idea. I now call it the start and stay approach. Start with energy if you have it. Use it. Let it move you. But stay, especially when the energy disappears, because that's the moment that actually changes you. And there's one rule that made that shift practical. I call it the stay rule. When you feel like disappearing, reduce the effort, but don't reduce the presence. If you plan an hour, do 10 minutes. If you plan 10 pages, write 3 lines. If you plan a full workout, just show up and move a little. Not to perform, not to impress yourself, not to feel heroic, but to interrupt the pattern of disappearance. Because every time you stay, even briefly, something shifts. You create evidence. Evidence that you are someone who shows up. Evidence that effort is still possible, even when excitement disappears. And that evidence slowly rebuilds something motivation never could. Self-trust. The goal isn't intensity. It's continuity. Continuity rebuilds trust. Intensity builds ego. And ego is the first thing to panic when motivation fades. You don't need more motivation. You need to stop protecting your ambition from ordinary effort. That's the real courage. Not starting big, staying small when necessary, and refusing to vanish. Stay, even when it feels ordinary. If this made something click for you, take a second to like the video. It helps this reach people who are quietly stuck in the same cycle. And if you want to understand more about how intention turns into action and why it often doesn't, subscribe. That's exactly what this channel explores. But I'm curious about something. When is the last time you felt genuinely motivated to start something? And how long did that motivation actually last? Leave your answer in the comments. Sometimes the first step in breaking the pattern is simply noticing it.